What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, episode 44 of the podcast, and on this episode, we're going to talk the Atlas's offseason moves, who stays and who goes, and this is part of a series being done by Inside Lacrosse, where they're taking a look at all 7 PLL clubs and what the offseason may hold for each of these clubs heading into 2021. So, just to kind of recap the Atlas from a overall organizational perspective, the Atlas went 5-5 in 2019 under then head coach John Paul, and the team didn't really look great, but they at least had a foundation, it seemed like. The defense was an issue for sure, but the offense just needed more time to gel, and I think getting comfortable playing with each other. Then in 2020, the team went 1-4 in the championship series, including a loss in the postseason to the Archers in that first round. The defense kind of looked the same as 2019, and the offense looked far worse than I think any of us could have really expected, at least a lot of the people that I've talked to since the championship series and even during the championship series. And really the offense in particular had a lot of shooters, as we all would have expected, but they didn't really have any feeders other than Rob Pennell. And that's where a guy like Joel Tinney, you could tell the difference between 2019 and 2020 was with Joel Tinney, as he was the number 4 assist leader on the Atlas in 2019 and was also one of the top dodge to feed middies in all the PLL in 2019. And we talked about that during the championship series here on the podcast as well. But really, I think one of the biggest things it seems like everybody can agree on here is that the roster needs to be shaken up, but the question really is, who stays and who goes? Now, the article breaks down who could be traded at each position between attack, midfield, and defense, and we're going to go through here over the next few minutes and kind of break each one of those scenarios down. So at attack, they list Eric Law and Ryan Brown as 2 of the options to get traded at attack. And I think for me personally, after reading the reasons why, I would say I would rather trade neither of them actually, so long as you can get a deal for Rob Pennell. So that's really the biggest part to my thing, is that you have to be able to get a deal for Rob Pennell in order for Law and Brown to be able to stay. Otherwise, then yeah, you do have to look at trading a guy like Eric Law or Ryan Brown, or even, hey, I think a guy like Chris Cloutier could get some interest from other clubs. But I think that the offense got stuck at X too much in 2020, and there was really no off-ball movement from the middies up top within this Atlas offense. So you saw kind of stick behind at X with Rob Pennell way too much and kind of forcing him to have to make plays late in the shot clock on an island all alone. And then Pennell could really benefit, I think, from being traded to a team like the Chaos, possibly. As we all know, they might be looking at shipping out Connor Fields here this offseason. Where he'll end up, or if he goes, is another question, and we can get to that on a later episode of the podcast. So I think Pennell could be a guy that you could see gets shipped out for maybe a 3rd or 4th round pick, and that's something that I'll talk a little more about later on in this episode. But then in the midfield, they list Paul Rabel, Connor Busick, and Joel Tinney as 3 of the guys that could possibly be traded from that midfield group. And all I have to say is this: for the love of God, do not trade Joel Tinney. I have said it before on the podcast, I am an Atlas fan and I will support them and all that, but if they trade Joel Tinney, that might actually be the thing that makes me move on from my fandom of the Atlas and kind of turn in my fan card for the Atlas. And quite frankly, I think if you get rid of Joel Tinney after not really giving him any sort of a chance in 2020 to show what he can do, to me, that's almost a fireable offense for Ben Rubior. But again, we'll talk more about that on later episodes at such a time. But I think for me, between the other 2, Paul Rabel and Connor Busick, I'd say between the 2, I'd go with Paul Rabel being the one that gets traded. But there's also a lot of people that I've talked to that really want 2020 to be the end of Paul Rabel as a player and really have him transition into Paul Rabel, the executive. And I could see that happening. The guy's 35, 36, something like that, somewhere in his mid 30s. So I definitely think that it wouldn't come as much of a surprise to anybody in the lacrosse world if that were to happen. But otherwise, it then becomes a question of, do you want to go that way, or should we just go ahead and trade you? So that's, again, another thing that we'll have to see when it finally comes to that. But then you finally look at the defense, and they basically name everybody in the article outside of Cade Van Raphorst or Craig Schick. And I think at that point it becomes take your pick who you want to get rid of. But I think that probably one of the bigger targets you could get some interest for is Tucker Durkin, because he's that physical crease presence. I also think that Callum Robinson could be another trade option there. They do mention that you probably want to ship out 2 of those pulls, because you can then make room for possibly a draft pick coming in on defense as well. So it kind of gives you that flexibility on your roster there. So I definitely agree with that. And, I was critical of a guy like Austin Pafani in 2019 for the way that he played then. I thought it was very lackluster, but he really seemed to bounce back in 2020, and he really showed me the kind of player that he could be given a certain matchup with guys. And, I've said in the past that in 2019, you go back and look at some of the matchups he drew, like Jules Henningberg, not really the best matchup that you want to get. Like, I don't think anybody wants to be matched up on Jules Henningberg, so you can't really fault him for some of the assignments he was getting. So from the way that he played in the championship series, he at least gets another year in my book. So then, like I said, it kind of becomes between Callum Robinson, Tucker Durkin, and whoever else is there. Kyle Hartzell's another one. But really, keep in mind that the Atlas could be looking to get a pick or 2 back in any of these trades, as they'll only have 3 in next spring's collegiate draft. Their 3rd rounder that I mentioned before was sent to the Chrome in a trade for Romar Dennis, and that 3rd round pick was later then traded to the Chaos for Matt Gaudette. So the Atlas have a lot of work to do to get this roster looking younger and faster, as Ben Rubior wants to create more of a transition game with this team. And another thing I'll say is that Ben Rubior, keep in mind, was also the unanimously named last place head coach in the PLL, according to you guys, the listeners on Twitter, during that PLL head coaching ranking show that we did about a month or so ago now. So the offense just really needs to get back to what it was in 2019, I think, and Joel Tinney needs to be a big part of that. And then you just kind of start from there, really. You retool the defense entirely around guys like Van Raphorst, Schick, and Jack Kincannon. I think if you do that on both sides of the field, if you do that, maybe, just maybe, the Atlas can compete in 2021. But that'll do it for episode 44 of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, literally everywhere you guys get your podcasts. But that'll do it for episode 44, guys. I'll talk to you later.